us start the discussion with Assault on Precinct 13, which, if not Carpenter's first full feature, was certainly his first to receive a wide release, I think I'm correct in saying. Scott, what saith ye?
Yes, Dark Star being effectively a kind of extended student film kind of deal.
Something like that.
Yes, Assault on Precinct 13 sees Austin Stoker's California Highway Patrol officer, Lieutenant Ethan Bishop's day get increasingly problematic from a seemingly easy starting point. He's asked to oversee the final day's activities of closing down an old police precinct that's moving elsewhere from its current anti-salubrious environs of a rough LA ghetto. It has a skeleton staff, a desk sergeant and 2 administrators, Laurie Zimmer's Lee and Nancy Loomis's Julie, but spoilers, staffing levels are about to be further reduced. Meanwhile, the prison transfer bus has to make an emergency pit stop when an inmate falls ill, bringing Darwin Joson's enigmatic convicted murderer Napoleon Wilson and fellow ne'er-do-well Tony Burton's Wells to the party, along with some other characters that we shouldn't get too attached to. Furtherly, meanwhile, in the aftermath of a police action that saw 6 gang members gunned down, said gangs are out for blood, seemingly at random picking an ice cream van chappie, and as part of an extreme no witnesses policy, the young girl that he was serving. Her distraught father gives chase and manages to take out his daughter's killer, but the numbers are not in his favour and he flees, shell-shocked, to the precinct, pursued by an embarrassment of gangsters intent on getting him and anyone that gets in the way. The shock of the first wave of attacks is repelled, but at the cost of, well, everyone not named previously, and so the cops and criminals must band together to survive until help arrives, if indeed it will, with the communications and the electricity cut. And, well, that's more or less your lot, which is normally a point where I'd say it doesn't sound like an awful lot to hang a film from, and I guess it isn't, but for once that's a positive rather than a negative. The simplicity turns out to be a strength, allowing time to focus on the tension and the characters. It's the interplay between Stoker and Josten that sells the film, in particular the hints at unravelling what's going on with Napoleon Wilson. For all his tough guy quips and demeanour, he's no crazed killer. Even if the script is hanging multiple light shades on it, it's still one of the brightest lights in the movie. It helps that Carpenter boy knows how to shoot a shootout, with the back half of the movie in particular being a great combination of ratchety tension and kinetic release. It goes without saying that this holds up very well today and is at least in the running for being Carpenter's best film.
Agreed. Yeah. I would. Yeah. This would be down as one of 2 contenders for favourite Carpenter film for me. It succeeds massively on such a slim premise. I often see this described as a remake of Rio Bravo, but I've never seen Rio Bravo, so I can't I can't speak to that. But I think Assault on Precinct 13 is possibly the first sort of siege movie that I ever encountered at a relatively tender age, and it is one of the very formative sort of experiences that I had in movie going outside of mainstream cinema fare. Catching this on, it would have been BBC Two on Moviedrome or something with Alex Cox on a late night showing of sort of cult movies, and it had a huge influence over future tastes that I would develop, and also I suppose this was the point at which my nascent critical faculties were beginning to flourish. And I've been listening to another podcast recently where guests are sort of interviewed with a set group of questions recently. And this is one of those movies where I think if you pose the question, what would you show someone to try and describe, who didn't know what cinema was, to try and describe what cinema was, I think this is one of those movies that does everything with such efficiency that it's one of the sort of purest technical examples of what a good film is and how a good film works. But that I suspect I'm not alone in feeling that way. But sorry, I'm rambling now.
Yeah, efficiency is exactly the word I was going to use, Craig. It's taut, it's lean, and it's efficient. It's only like a 90-minute film, and even then it still manages to find moments of where not a lot is happening, but just allows for the tension to build in the next sequence. And it's just a wonderfully clinically delivered film. It doesn't have to give like much backstory in the characters or anything. It's all about how the characters act rather than what they've done in the past. And nobody is doing anything outrageous. Nobody's doing anything particularly stupid. The only issue I've ever had character-wise is when one of the two women that work there wants to hand over the guy who came running in and brought the gang with him immediately. I'm like, yeah, not so much. Like, you work in a police station. You should be aware that you're meant to protect people. You can't blame this man for being chased. But beyond that, the characters seem like reasonable people. And Napoleon Wilson in particular, it would be so easy for him to... the first time I watched this, I kept expecting him to turn on them. I was expecting him to betray them because, well, he's this multiple killer, right? That's how that would go in any other film, and he doesn't because you know what? Maybe a murderer, but I've got my own set of values, and also I realise that my survival probably is tied in with these other people's, even though they're police people. So
it's quietly got a lot to say about the American justice system. One of the things I love most about this movie is that the character's great success is that they make it through. I mean, you know, a number of them make it through the siege, and I don't think it's ruining it. If you haven't seen the movie at this point, Napoleon is one of the characters. Yeah, you've had 42 years. Napoleon is one of the characters who makes it through the siege, but for him that's great. He survived the movie, but he's still on his way to death rows. And there's a sort of very quiet dignity there that the great asset this movie has is its focus is purely on what are the elements I need to tell the story I want to tell, and backstory is hinted at in certain characters, but it is not handed to you on a plate. You're given enough to make it difficult not to sympathise with characters that you might otherwise not want to sympathise with. The huge economy in character, but enough to make you question your perception of who someone is at face value. And the other thing that it does remarkably well, that I can't think of another film that actually at all that does it this well, is that the menace, which in a lot of ways this is a horror movie, right?
Yeah, there might as well be zombies with guns, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. By all accounts, it's pretty much a horror movie, even though it's not a slasher movie. It would be billed and marketed as a thriller, but it's as good as a horror movie. And it does this wonderful thing of the antagonists in the movie are they're, for the most part, faceless, apart from the start of the movie. They're completely anonymous, and they never speak. They have no dialogue. We're never 100% clear on who they are or what their intentions. They might be human. They might be, for all we know, they might be supernatural. They're a presence rather than a group of individual characters. And there is something innately terrifying about a force or an entity which has an objective and will not speak with you and will not rationalise with you and is just headed towards that at the exclusion of all else. Very much in the way that the Terminator worked. It can't be reasoned with, it can't be bargained with, it absolutely will not stop until you are dead. And that's what that is the force that these gangs represent, and there is something absolutely terrifying about the silence with which they go about their business.
And silent purpose, yeah.
Absolutely. Just to have this thing in front of you which you understand wants to kill you and will not respond to you, that will just stare you down and blankly continue to try to murder you, is infinitely more terrifying than someone who wants to explain to you an elaborate plot as to why they've tied you up in some sort of mechanism and whether or not you want to play a game because of something terrible you once did. I think it is arguably Carpenter's purest and in that respect most cinematic work, and I would pick it as an example of there would be a short list of 5 movies to explain to someone, here is what cinema is, here is the most distilled list of movies I can give you to explain what cinema is. I think this would be a pretty good pick for that list.
Yes. I don't know if it would work for that for me, but I just enjoy it an awful lot. I think it's, like you say, it's one of these films I saw a good long while ago. I've not really returned to this, I guess, as much as you have, but I've always enjoyed it when I have, and certainly it was a pleasure to rewatch it again just this week. So, yes, I will never tire of it. It is just very efficiently told. Yeah, I don't think I've really got any faults I'd want to pick with it, so I shan't.
No, I think there's other things actually that I like about it on a technical aspect too. There's some simple things, but for me, just I don't know, make the film that bit better. For instance, the gunshots. They're not huge squibs blowing holes out of walls, and there's not not big explosions and loud. they're using silenced weapons, which is actually a key plot point. But also, there's something about the way the bullets land in the wall, and particularly the way the glass breaks, or rather it doesn't.
Yeah.
That makes me very much think that was, and I haven't looked into the production of this, so I don't know, but it makes me feel like it was done with actual real rounds rather than little explosive charges planted in walls in most films.
There's one of that shots, that first volley where they all sort of hunker down, and the first time that they just really lay into the station and they're opening salvo, and there's a shot in there where there's a stack of papers just suddenly goes zip, and like beautifully they sort of just like fan out and sort of float down to the ground. If I remember correctly, I haven't rewatched it in preparation for this. Last time I watched it was some years ago, but yeah, that in particular, I'm like, that would be really hard to replicate by doing anything other than just shooting a bullet through a ream of through a ream of A4 paper.
Yeah, there's a few bits like that, and yes, the way the things end in the wall, and as I said, the way the glass breaks, like that feels to me like they have people genuinely firing on their set. And I don't know, it makes it that bit more believable to me. That at least that it feels like that. It's not your typical movie thing of everything exploding outwards, like it was hit more like by a howitzer shell than a simple bullet, and with massive explosions and things. And it's like, the diminished sound from the silenced weapons and the zip of the bullets, and then that impact. It's like, okay. Then now you feel more brought into the film and more in their position. Like, oh yeah, okay. And you just kind of feel
That's a really good point, actually.
Your head pulling down into your shoulders a wee bit.
That's a very good point. I hadn't really considered that before.
So yeah, there's a few things that, and it's just, like I said again, going back to it's efficiently made, and it's just a really taut and effective little thriller, and it's fantastic.
I think we're all in agreement with that then.
Yes.
Even if you guys wouldn't show it to aliens, I would. I'm going to go on to The Fog then, because we're doing this chronologically. Are we not talking about Halloween on this list?
You already covered your 70s horror, you two, did you not?
Yes, we did.
That's a very good point.